So thank you for joining us tonight. I know 5 o'clock's a little bit of a tough time at the end of a long book festival day, but I promise you will not be disappointed for having come through. My name's Andrea Mullarkey. I'm a teen librarian here in Berkeley at the Taria Hall Pittman South branch of Berkeley Public Library. But really, you're here to hear from 3 amazing young adult authors who happen to write about romance as well as all the other things that come with being a teenager in the world today. Sitting just to my left as you look at us, is Nicola Yoon. Some of you may recognize her from her book, Everything, Everything. Yes, you can go right ahead and clap for Everything, Everything. Nicola grew up in Jamaica and in Brooklyn and now lives in Los Angeles with her husband and their daughter. Everything, Everything is her first novel, and it debuted at #1 on the New York Times Young Adult bestseller list, and definitely deserves another round of applause for that. Sitting next to Nicola is Alyson Noël. Alyson is a #1 New York Times bestselling author of 23 YA and science fiction novels, including series like The Immortal, Riley Bloom, Soul Seekers. Her newest novel, Unrivaled, which she's got there, is a little bit of a departure. It's filled with mystery, suspense, and an insider's only look at Los Angeles. She's got millions of copies in print. Her books have been translated into 36 languages. She was born and raised in Orange County, has lived in lots of parts of the world, but now lives again in Southern California, where she's working on her next book, which we might hear a little bit about. So thank you, Alyson, for being with us today. And then next to Alyson is Julie Buxbaum. And yes? It's okay. You can show all the love whenever you want today. I know it's really hard to sort of hold back, so we won't be sad. Julie has written books for adults like The Opposite of Love and After You, and her book also has been translated into like 25 languages. Is that really true? Wow, 25 languages. And Tell Me 3 Things is her first novel for young adults, and she also lives in Los Angeles. So if you thought you were coming to the Bay Area Book Festival, you're going to get a little travel journey today. So thank you, all 3 of you, for being here with us today. And I'm just going to start off by noting that this is a panel on romance. You all write romances. Your books have other things in common also. They're all set in LA, the 3, or Southern California. They all involve some sort of complicated family relationships. And they all have kind of plot twists or mysterious elements or characters in them. So we're going to try really, really hard today and not have any spoilers. We're going to leave time at the end for questions, but I'm going to ask you to kind of indulge us in that. How many of you have read at least one of the books? How many of you have read like all 3 of the books? Wow, that would have been really impressive. So there's surprises in there for all of you still. So we're gonna maybe not get to the end result. So if you go away feeling like you want a little bit more, you should buy the books and read them because they're amazing. It's true. So that's my caveat for there. All 3 authors will be signing afterwards outside across the street, just a little bit up, and we'll have Katina will walk us over there if you want to buy books and have them signed. So don't hesitate. So with that, let's dive right in. I guess my first question is, you all write in what I would like to consider sort of the internet age. And one of the things that comes with that is social media and sort of all the distractions of sort of internet life. As a writer, what are the opportunities that you find from that, and what are the things that you find really challenging about being a writer in the new 21st century writing world?
So I would say that cell phones are a pain in books, just because you always have one and you can always turn it on, and it's like you can't have so much mystery sometimes because the cell phone is always there, and you could always there's a way to get out of any situation, unless you read a lot of books and the cell phone has out of batteries or it fell. I think in my second book, the cell phone is smashed deliberately so that I could sort of move the plot forward without being able to get out of everything. But I mean, people sort of complain a lot about social media, and say that the kids are staying too much inside and sort of not interacting in the world. But I think it's like anything. it's just a new way of interacting with the world, right? So people complained about the telephone before too, and I think it's a similar sort of adjustment that we have to get used to. It's just a new way of interacting with the world. I don't see it as like being troublesome. I mean, I guess some of the things that are troublesome are the anonymity and potential for bullying. And I think those things are probably a little bit more pervasive, so we have to be more vigilant. But I do not see it as the end of society as we know it.
Yeah, from like a writing plot perspective, I agree with you. The cell phone can definitely pose some problems. And I remember before the cell phone, you would have a lot of plots in books and TV rely on the message left on the answering machine, that the answering machine that played out to the entire house, you know, because it was an actual machine. It wasn't voicemail. So you do have some plot problems to work around because it is so easy to get information out or send a SOS out to your friends if you're in a jam. From just a human being side of it, I do like the immediacy that authors can have with their readers. I mean, when I was growing up, if I could have sent a tweet to Judy Blume, oh my God, like that would have been the most amazing thing in the world, But back then, authors just felt so remote and so untouchable and like these gods that sat in front of typewriters that, no one could ever go near. And so I like this immediacy of being able just to speak directly with the reader about something they liked, even something they didn't like, and just sort of have that contact and talk about other people's books as well. It makes you feel like you're just sort of this tribe. I love when you're at an event and someone will come up to you and they're like, hey, I'm so-and-so, and give you their Twitter name. And, you feel like you know them. So I have all these amazing virtual friends, that I know out there. And I think it sort of shrinks the world in that way. They're from all over the place. And so you feel like you have this giant tribe of book-loving people. And so I think that's one of the real positives about social media and being an author in the world of social media.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it definitely has taken away certain opportunities that, sitcoms from the 80s where there are these misunderstandings that you can't actually have anymore because people have cell phones. In my book, I did the opposite and fully embraced it and used social media as a full plot point because one character communicates with another purely through texting. And one of the things I wanted to look at was whether or not the written word is any less important than the spoken word. And I love social media, so I felt like it was important to include it. From a writer's perspective, though, the one thing that's really hard is that it's moving really fast. And so you want to make sure you don't put a certain technology in your book that's no longer being used. Like Facebook is no longer being used by teenagers, so it would completely date me if I had Facebook references, that sort of thing. And I don't think we can keep up fast enough because the publishing world is really slow. So I'm finishing a book right now that's fully written that's not coming out until February of next year. And who knows what's the new Snapchat of February of next year. I think another limitation is that a lot of social media is video now. And I can't put video in my book. I mean, I'm sure that there are probably books now that are, pushing the frontier that are, on the phone that have video enmeshed into them. I just don't do that. And so I think that is one limitation. On a personal level, the internet's ruining my life. I'm just so much dumber because of the internet. I don't know if other people feel this way, but having lived pre-internet and having lived post-internet, I was much smarter pre-internet. I think teenagers who've grown up on it have not been dumbed by it. It's those of us who had the way before, whose brains did not immediately develop with it. So I have no attention span left because of the internet. And I find myself internet snacking all day where I consistently go and check all these sites and then poof, there goes 5 hours of my time spent on Twitter and Facebook, of which I am no smarter for. And so one of the things I do that makes writing possible, we were just talking about this, is I use the Freedom app. Does anyone know what the Freedom app is? If you don't, I'm about to change your lives because it's the greatest thing in the whole world. You put it on your computer and it locks your computer from using the internet for a set period of time. The problem is there's this magical thing called the smartphone. And so I take out my cell phone and check my email on my cell phone. And so now I have an app on my cell phone called Forest, which grows trees if you don't look at your cell phone for a period of time. And if you look at your cell phone during that period of time, you kill the tree. which is supposed to make you feel bad. Unfortunately, after you've killed 152 trees, you don't feel as sorry. I'm like negative 10,000 points on forest. So yeah, it's destroying my life.
Thank you for mentioning that one of the things that you do in your book is to talk through text. Your characters talk through text. I noticed all three of the authors use new media for their characters to talk. Tell me a little bit about how you made the decision to do that, and if it impacted the story or the characters in any way as you were writing or as you were thinking about their relationships.
So yeah, I mean, everything is a story of a 17-year-old girl who has an autoimmune disorder. So she's been stuck in her life, or stuck in her house for her entire life, and she hasn't left in 17 years. And then a super cute boy moves next door, and yeah, he's really cute, you guys. And it changes her whole life. And because she can't leave her house, one of the ways they communicate is that they message each other. And I write entire sections where it's just them texting and chatting. And what I really love about that is the idea of just falling in love with someone's brain. Without the physical part of it, just they fell in love with each other's just ideas and sort of quirkiness. And she uses proper grammar, and he, does not like punctuation in any way. And I loved sort of exploring that part of falling in love with someone that doesn't involve the physical aspect, because sometimes that gets distracting, which is not to say that physical aspects aren't nice and kissing is great, but I like the idea of them just falling in love that way. And then for Maddie, who's the main character, she posts book reviews on the internet too, because she's stuck in her house, and the way she interacts with the world is just to read books and then sort of review them for everyone else to see. Yeah, like I say, I mean, I feel like social media is a positive force for the most part. I mean, like anything, I think there's two sides, but I think for the most part it's positive. It was really fun to explore it in the book.
So Unrivaled takes place in LA, and it's about three teens that get caught up in a high-stakes competition, and the choices that they make in their quest to win the competition end up making them suspects in a pretty serious crime. So the book deals a lot with ambition, which is a major theme in it, and just how far you'll go to win or to fuel your dreams. Because for these three teens, winning the competition is all about fueling the dreams that they have. Layla needs it because she wants to be a journalist. She wants to be a serious journalist and go to New York to go to journalism school. Right now, she's supporting herself as writing a pretty popular Hollywood blog, but she despises the very subject that she's writing about. And Tommy moved out from Oklahoma. He wants to make his mark in the music world, but he also wants to impress the father that doesn't even know he exists. And he doesn't want to just walk up to him and introduce himself. He wants to feel like an equal to him, and so he feels like he needs to earn his way there. And Aster grew up as kind of a Beverly Hills princess with all the luxuries, just right there for her. But her parents have a pretty firm, strict idea of how they want her to live her life. And she has a very different dream. And so she feels like in order to be true to herself and live the life that she wants to live, she needs to be able to finance her own way and not rely on her parents or her trust fund. So they're all in it for their own reasons. Social media comes up, like Layla's a blogger. And so there's quite a bit of Layla's blogging in the book. And those were actually really fun to write because I got to make up Hollywood gossip. She's writing about celebrities. And so I started reading a lot of, Page Six and Pop Sugar and TMZ and all these things. And my God, I mean, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, I wasn't like a really big reader of those sites, but I was like, I can't even go too far. Like anything I write will be believable, contrasted with what's really going on out there. So that was like a really fun part to write. There's also a secondary character, Trina Moretti, who's a journalist with the LA Times who's covering the crime. And so a little bit in book one, but you'll get more of that in book two, which I just finished. You'll see like her her post on the crime. And so that kind of serves two purposes. Like you get to know Trina better through the way she's journaling about this crime, but you're also getting the facts of the crime and hopefully a non-boring sort of info dumpy. We're going to have this conversation and give you all the facts of the crime. And, so it's just kind of a fun way to share information and reveal character as well. And then, of course, they will text each other on occasion in order to plan meetups and get together and all that. Probably totally unaware that all of these texts are probably going to be used against them someday in a court of law. So it was a fun way to sort of give flavor to the book and define the characters and provide info all at the same time.
So Tell Me Three Things is about a 16-year-old girl, Jessie Holmes, who shortly after the death of her mother, her dad very quickly remarries a woman he met on the internet and moves her from middle-class Chicago to fancy pants LA, where she starts at this ultra-prestigious private school. And on day one, she's in way over her head, was wearing all the wrong clothes and saying all the wrong things. And then she gets an anonymous email from someone in her class, or saying he's from her class, offering to help her navigate sort of the wilds of her new school, except he wants to remain anonymous. So there's a social media conceit right there, where where the whole book is pretty much them going, not the whole book, but a lot of the book is them going back and forth in text messages. They quickly moved from email to text because I think teenagers text more than email. One great thing about people getting to know each other in that way, besides what Nikki said in terms of, the physical appearance stuff coming out of it, there's also a safety in writing as opposed to speaking, and a comfort that happens. And also for people who are awkward like me, it's really nice to be able to edit yourself and think about what you're going to say before you say it and give yourself those extra few beats. Which my main character really appreciates. When I first started dating my husband, about 2 weeks after our first date, he got sick with the flu. And it was a really, really bad case of the flu, and he was in bed for about 3 weeks. And it was the best thing that ever happened to our relationship because we could only talk on the phone during those 3 weeks. And I swear we got to know each other so much better than we would have had we been going on dates sitting across from each other from a table. We just felt more at ease. With the written word, I am just one of these people who's better at communicating on the page as opposed to in person. When I was a kid and I was angry at my parents, I used to write these long, angry letters to them and then wait for them to write in response because I couldn't articulate myself and explain. I used to be a lawyer. It's not surprising that I went to law school after hearing that. So I've always been someone who's just more comfortable communicating in words. And so it's felt like a natural thing for my character, who is not me, but is somewhat based on 16-year-old me. And I also just think magical things can happen on the internet. I once received an anonymous email out of nowhere, and it was one of those magical things in life, and that's what inspired the book. So it would have been weird not to have included that kind of thing.
So my next question is actually about that in your afterword, I think you make a mention of alterna me's or something, that this book is inspired by something that happened in your real life. I know you all have had lives before you became authors, and I imagine that there's some rich fodder there for the books you may write. And I wonder how much of the books that you write has some autobiographical element. Are there particular autobiographical bits? Are there themes that emerge that come out of who you are as a writer and then end up in the characters that you write? And why? And why would you be writing about those particular things?
So, for me, definitely. But if it's not something specific, then it's an emotional truth that's in the story. So with Everything, I started writing it when my daughter was 4 months old, and I was a very, very nervous mom, like super, she's going to get a cold, she's going to eat dirt, she's going to crawl out of my house and just be gone. And that's what inspired the book in the first place. So it started from that emotional place. What would life be like for a mom who had to take care of a girl the way you take care of an infant? And what would life be like for that girl who, is basically being treated like an infant her whole life, and that level of protection? So while I don't know anyone with this autoimmune disorder, it did come out of me being such a sort of nervous, panicky mom at the beginning. I am no longer a nervous, panicky mom. Like, my kid can eat dirt and be like, you're fine, everyone's fine. And for my second book, it's about like a Jamaican girl and a Korean boy who fall in love over 12 hours in New York City. And I am Jamaican, and my husband is Korean, and it might be a little bit biographical. And we didn't fall in love over 12 hours, but, we're in love. So, so I think everything is inspired in some way. If not, like, specifically, then there's an emotional truth to it. And I think writers, and I think these guys will agree with me, you're always trying to work something out. So there's that old adage, write what you know, but I don't really think that's the truth. You're writing what you're trying to figure out. Like everyone has like a central dramatic question, like a thing that they're trying to figure out through their writing. For me, I'm always trying to figure out like how you survive the loss of love. And I think my books are about that. Because I think love is this like beautiful, wonderful, amazing thing, but I think the potential for its loss is tragic. And I think that's something that you have to grapple with, like making yourself vulnerable. And you could be heartbroken, but love is awesome, but it could really suck. So I write about that a lot.
For Unrivaled, I will say that it's not particularly autobiographical, although I was born and raised in Southern California, so there's, a lot of that in there. The characters have bits of me. Layla is wants to be a writer. I think that's clear. Tommy and I share a similar musical taste. Aster and I have a deep, profound love of shoes. But a lot of, like Nikki was just saying, a lot of my books, it's more comes from an emotional place. Like, so with the Immortal series, I had just gone through a period where I lost 3 people I loved in 5 months. And then right after that, my husband was diagnosed with leukemia. And I almost lost him. So I was in this very, very dark space of grief when I wrote the first book, Evermore. And I wrote it for myself because I was trying to make sense of what I was going through. I had literally had no plans to publish it. I was under contract for 4 other books at the time, so I was just writing it on the side, and I was just trying to find my way through the grief. Why did this happen? What does it mean? Where do these people go? How do I still feel connected to them when they're no longer here physically? All these scenes were going through my head. And, finally, for the first time in my life, facing real mortality and my own mortality and the loss of, the love of my life, the possible loss of the love of my life. As I was writing that book, I came to terms with what had happened to me, and I found some sort of understanding and some sort of belief system for me. By the end of the book, I think the character, I poured all my grief into her. She lost her entire family. I killed off the family dog as well. I made her life as dark as possible because that's the place where I was coming from when I was writing the book. And, by the end of the book, she felt better. I felt better. And I had a better understanding of, why I may not have liked anything that happened. All I can do is take the lesson from these events and try to grow and accept it and move on from there. So every book has a piece of that. And I usually start with some sort of central question or emotional theme, that I'm trying to grapple with. Unrivaled was really just more of a fun departure for me. It was something different. It was I didn't have like the big existential crisis going on when I wrote it. So it was just sort of, what if, you took these 3 teens and they're all desperately hungry for something and they're super ambitious and driven, and you drop them into this star-studded, morally corrupt landscape that, people view as really aspirational, but there's a real dark side to this, and drop them in there and see how they fare when everything is turned upside down and they're really sucked in this dark side of the Los Angeles, California dream. So it was more just kind of a fun book to write. No real existential angst happening here.
I definitely agree with Nikki that when you're writing, you're sort of answering a question for yourself. For me, though, I don't know the question until the book is over. And I don't know why I'm asking it until the book is over. And then it becomes very clear to me why I was grappling with that question. For example, my second book, After You, is about a woman who steps into the life of her best friend after her best friend is murdered. And the central question of that book is, how well do you know the person you love? At the time, my husband had just asked me to marry him. And so it makes sense that I was sort of questioning sort of how close can you get to someone. And I started freaking out that I didn't know his first grade teacher's name or his favorite color, even though we had been together for 8 years at that time point. Anyhow, all of my books are deeply personal. This one is the most personal of all my books. I lost my mom at 14, and just like Jesse in this book, I have written a lot about grief through the years. As an aside, so my first book, I killed the mom. In my second book, I kill a mom. In this book, kill the mom. Clearly, I need to call my therapist at this point. Fourth book, I'm like, you know what? Not killing the mom. I'm just not going to do it. 2 pages in, I kill the dad. So clearly, I have some issues that need some working out. But with this book, going back to being 16 and sort of dealing with a loss and being visceral. The other books I was dealing with loss from a distance, and I've written a lot of essays about grief, and they're all about loss from a distance, like the experience of motherhood, having lost my mom young. But this book was going back to being 16, when it was so fresh, when it was so raw. One thing my main character does is she counts the days since she lost her mother. And so she'll be like, I survived 1 day, then I can survive 2. If I've survived 2, I can survive 3. If I've survived 3, I can survive 4. And I remember very clearly doing that at the time. That was the way I got through. Now, fortunately, I count in years. Last month, it was 24 years since my mom died. And the feeling of counting in years now is it's sort of almost a celebration of survival in a way that it used to be just getting through the days. And so that was definitely poured into the book. Though I feel like it's sort of misleading because it's not just a dead mom book. It's actually a really happy book. I mean, there's heart-shaped waffles on the cover. So you know that it's really not purely a tearjerker. There is, the happy counterpoint to that, because I wanted to write a book about first loss, but also about first love. And so pouring ourselves into the book, as I mentioned before, I also got an anonymous email. And that was an incredibly happy thing to have happened to me. It was sort of this weirdly magical, strange thing that doesn't happen in real life. And when real life is stranger than fiction, obviously you borrow it from for your fiction if you're a novelist. And so I did. And so I took this really horrible thing that happened to me, this really wonderful thing that happened to me, and sort of married it into this very personal book.
Well, I'm glad you said the words first love, because this panel is called Love and Loss, and we've talked a little bit about the loss. Let's talk a little bit about the love. You all write books with very romantic elements in them, and you write them for teenagers. So I'm going to ask first one question. What's it like to write a love scene with teenagers that may or may not know what they're doing? How is it to write a first kiss or a first something more?
Fortunately, I was a late bloomer, so it's still very fresh in my mind, which is probably more than I should have shared. Yeah, oh, good. But I mean, I love love. I'm such a goober. I'm such a romantic goober. I mean, I could write about first kisses. I could write about second kisses, because I think second kisses are better than first kisses, because you learn a little something, and if they're just as good, then they're even better. If you can capture that magic the second time, then you've got something good going. I'll tell you, when I went to see the audio recording of the book, and when I got there, she was reading the big romantic scene, and my husband was with me, and we were so embarrassed. We're 15. We're ooh, they're talking about kissing, and I'm like, come on, 40, come on. And I wrote this book, and we were really, really totally embarrassed. I mean, it's really just fun and joyous. I mean, just remembering how you feel, how new everything is, how you're kissing is just another way of talking, I think, right? It's just another way of getting to know someone. And there's a wonder in that, the first time you look at someone, the first time, and you do get the tingles, and your tummy does flip. And it's really fun to write. I mean, it's one of the best parts of my job.
I love writing about romance for teens, and I love reading it as well. I think, as an adult, you never, ever are going to experience it quite like that again. That first mad crush, that first relationship, that first kiss with the boy you really wanted to kiss and you really hope he likes you back. that's kind of it's a wondrous time. And when you're in it, you don't see it that way. But looking back on it from a point of nostalgia, it's a pretty wondrous time. And, as time goes on, you have a betrayal, you have a heartbreak, things happen to you, and you get a little bit of a tougher exterior. You build up some calluses and some walls. You get a little more jaded, a little more cynical. So you're never really going to feel that way quite again. But you can, by writing those scenes, you can just immerse yourself right back in time where you're 14 again or 16 again, and there's that boy and there's that in you, and he's looming in, and it's just this great moment. And yeah, your stomach starts, and it's just so exciting. You can experience that as a writer, you can experience that as a reader, and I love those moments. And I think the romance also, it's fun to write and it's fun to read, but I also think it sort of serves this purpose as it's a step towards kind of defining yourself. And not that you're defining yourself through the boy, but you're defining yourself. You're making choices that are going to define you. You're choosing the type of person you want to be with. You're choosing the type of partner you want to be. And these are all just small steps towards finding your way in life. And it's like choosing the friends that you hang out with. It's the same sort of defining choices that you're making, and that's just one of them. And so I think it's a really big, important aspect of being a teen, and I think it's something that to be taken seriously in books. It's not just thrown in there lightly so you can have a romance. I mean, it has to be pretty meaningful, because it's pretty meaningful for the teens reading it as well.
As I mentioned, I used to write for adults, and one of the reasons why I switched to YA is exactly this reason. So for much of my adult life, I sort of pretended like I wasn't a grown-up, and I just sort of felt like I was pretending on the side, or sort of adulting on the side. And then all of a sudden, my life got pretty adult. I mean, I was married, and I had 2 kids and a full-time job as a novelist, and I was adulting as hard as a human being can adult. And I was sort of like, all right, the jig is up, I am a grown-up. And once I admitted that to myself, I started missing, being 16 when not all of my life's questions were answered. In order for my life to change right now, something really terrible would have to happen, not something happy. I don't want another first kiss right now, because that would mean something terrible has happened with the love of my life. But that doesn't mean I don't like to think about first kisses. And so going back to being 16 in my fiction was a way of sort of re-exploring that time. I'm also a huge romantic, a big romantic comedy nerd. And I love all the feels. I love the magic of a first kiss. And there's also a bit of wish fulfillment in writing about being 16 in these epic romances. Because when I was 16, I had epic unrequited crushes. Infinite numbers of epic unrequited crushes. So it's really fun to be able to give my characters those happy endings. I don't even think of them as happy endings, actually. I think of them as happy beginnings. I don't necessarily think of my characters as, fated to be together forever and ever and ever. And I don't think it matters if they're fated to be together forever and ever and ever. But that first kiss, there's something about it. And so it's really fun to go back and sort of explore the swoony feels. I was about to just tell stories about all my epic crushes, but I'm not going to do that.
So you've written for adults. I know that there have been some younger age books in your repertoire too, Alyson. What are the things that are specific to writing for teens that really call you to do that, either once or exclusively? Is there something about teen readers? Is there something about the publishing industry for teens versus for adults and for kids? Why do you write for teens?
Yeah, I think for me, I tend to be very philosophical, and I think being a teenager you're naturally philosophical. That is your mode of operating in the world. You're trying to figure out who you are, what you want to be, like how you feel about things, like the world and your place in it. I think that's just a natural state of being for teenagers, and I'm sort of like that all the time anyway. Like I'm like sort of obnoxious about it, like, what does it really, really mean? And my husband's like, it doesn't mean anything, let's just move on. But I'm like always questioning. I mean, and I think it's a good way to engage with the world. It's such a privilege to like write for teenagers, because then you get to be a part of that conversation, and you get to say, here are some questions you could ask about the world, and you know, what matters to you, just to maybe like steer the conversation in their minds a little bit, you know, because it's a hard thing. I mean, I firmly believe that angst is good for you. Like, the questions count and more than the answers, and you should just always be questioning. But when I was a teenager, I thought I needed to know all the answers, and if I could just figure it out, then everything would be all set, and I could just go from point A to point B into Z, and I would know everything. Like, I got involved in like Objectivism by Ayn Rand. Do you guys know Ayn Rand? I mean, oh my God, I'm not an objectivist now, but I thought that if I could just find the philosophy, you know, like, and have all those questions answered, then I would know everything. But now I think it's the questioning that's important, and that leads you to define life for yourself, the meaning of life for yourself. So yeah, I mean, it's really a privilege because I get to like be in that conversation with people who are really thinking about, you know, the meaning of life still.
I have to say that I didn't set out to write for teens. I had this story in my head that I carried around for 15 years, and I would work on it off and on. It started as a short story. I'd work on it off and on, and then 9/11 happened, and I was a flight attendant in New York City, and I got a massive pay cut and had to search for bombs on the airplane. I said, you know what, it's time I finally go after this dream. And so I got serious about it, and I turned that short story into a book. I didn't realize I'd written a young adult until I got my first agent, and he read it, and he basically said, you know, like, what we have here is a young adult novel. And I was like, oh, really? You know, because to me, I was just writing a story that happened to have a teen protagonist. And this was back in 2005 when that was first published. It was Faking 19, probably my most autobiographical book to date. But there was the book deal was a 2-book deal, and it just so happened that I had already, in order to ease the anxiety of waiting to hear back once the book is submitted, you can do 2 things. You can check your email every 20 seconds, or you can just start writing something else. And I did both. And it just turned out that the second book I was writing also was a teen protagonist. And so when I got the call for the first book deal, it was for a 2-book deal. I said, well, that's handy because I have this other young adult book in progress. So it's just sort of the voice that just speaks to me and comes naturally to me. And I know, I would be at a dinner party and people would say, oh, do you write young adult novels because you just loved high school so much? And I'm like, no, those are like the worst years of my life. You couldn't pay me to go back. And then my husband said, but you are being paid to go back. And, and then I realized, oh my God, I'm actually making a living, like consistently throwing myself back into the most horrific time of my life. And I keep doing it. And I'm, 4 books in now, and I'm still doing it. Who needs therapy, right?
I have some numbers.
Right. But there's something, I find it a privilege to write for teens. There's something so great about writing for that audience. There's something so authentic and genuine. When they love you, they love you. When they don't, they don't. But it's all really real and really immediate and really genuine. And I have such respect for that. And I remember so clearly what those feelings felt like, what it was like to navigate that space in that time and feeling like you're marginalized by other people, but what you're going through is really real. And so, I just try to sort of recreate that and respect it and write stories that surround it, and hope I get to continue to.
Thank you. I hated high school also. They were really, really, really hard years for me. So I hadn't really thought about the fact that I'm going back there now. Maybe part of it is I like to rewrite the ending and go back and be a better version of myself. But having written for adults and having written for teens, I often get the question of, like, do I write differently now? And I don't. I write exactly the same. The process is exactly the same. The only difference is my characters are 16. I think people don't give teenagers enough credit. Their reading level is amazing, and they're incredibly smart and engaged with the world, and there's absolutely no reason to write down to them, and so I don't. it's really just fun to write about that time in life when all of your life's questions aren't answered and the world is sort of wide open. Again, firsts. There's something magical about exploring firsts. So that's why I started writing for teens. Now that I've had a book out, it's amazing the response from teens. As readers, they're incredibly engaged, incredibly active on social media, very fast to reach out and talk to you. And they're just wonderful fans in a really lovely, lovely way that you don't find in the adult world. And so, I'm really happy to be in the teen world now. Also, the YA authors are really amazing and fun. So it's just been a joy. But really, I guess there's just some part of me that needs to go back and have my epic, unrequited, crush like me back. Like maybe it all comes back to that.
Ultimate do-over.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you. So there are more than a couple. There are a lot of trends in YA publishing, and I'm wondering how many of them impact you and the decisions you make about what to write or how to write. There's this obvious thing that happens that many YA books come in trilogies or series, that's a trend that we're seeing. The We Need Diverse Books trend that publishers seem so eager to tap into. Does that impact how you choose what to write? Does it impact what gets written and published in what order? How does that happen for you? Or do you just try and ignore that and write what you're going to write anyway? And are you able to?
Yeah, I mean, I will say that you can't write to a trend, because publishing takes forever. So by the time you've finished your book and by the time it gets published, the trend is over. But so that's just the practical part. But the other part is that writing a book takes a long time and is really hard. And if you're not writing something that you're passionate about, that you really feel, and a story that you want to tell, everyone will know, and your book will be terrible. So another practical thing, don't do that because your book will be bad. And then I'll talk a little bit about We Need Diverse Books because I'm a part of the We Need Diverse Books team. And I don't think it's a trend, I guess. I mean, I just think that we live in this big, beautiful, diverse world. And the truth is we're diverse. So our jobs are to tell the truth, and diversity is a part of that truth, right? There's millions of species of butterflies. There's millions of different stories to tell, and they should all be told.
Yeah, I agree. I don't write with a trend in mind because, like you said, it's such a slow-moving process that you're never going to be there on time. That said, I did luckily once coincide with a trend. My first 7 books were contemporaries, and when I wrote Evermore, that was a paranormal. And I love paranormal books. That was my big thing growing up. I didn't really read fantasy, but I read a lot of paranormal. Casper the Friendly Ghost was my favorite cartoon. So I was surprised I hadn't even tried that earlier, but I wanted to write. That was the book that was inspired by loss and grief, and I wanted to really explore that. And the best way to explore that was to write a paranormal book. And so the book deals a lot with the afterlife, reincarnation, the soul's journey, and all these things that I was thinking about and studying at the time. All of it went into the book. The funny thing is that when I did decide, because I wrote it for myself, and then when I finished it, I thought, well, I wrote a book. I may as well at least show it to my publisher and see if they're interested. And, and they bought it, and there was no fanfare. They just, okay, we'll publish that. A couple weeks before it came out, I was in this cold sweat of a panic thinking, oh my God, I think I just ended my career because I've written 7 contemporaries. No one's going to want to read this book. This is a game changer, and not in the good way. And it ended up being the book that changed my life. It, sold multi-millions of copies all over the world. I got to travel all over the world. That was a happy coincidence with the trend, but it wasn't something I chased because at the time I wrote it, I was in such deep grief. I wasn't paying attention to Twilight and the things that were happening because of that. I was locked into my own black world. So that was a happy coincidence. after I wrote 14 fantasies in a row, I was a little burnt out, and I decided my next book I want it to be a contemporary. So I think that it's important just to write the book that is speaking to you at that moment, write the book that's in your heart, the one that you feel compelled to write, because you might coincide luckily with a trend, but chances are you won't. So.
I just want to echo what Nikki said about the "we need diverse books" concept. It's important to say it's not a trend because it's just a movement to have greater representation in books, which is something that's incredibly important, and it's something that should never stop. And I think a trend sort of implies that at some point we'll be done with it, and I hope we are never done with it. As for writing to trend, I think the answer is to do the opposite. Because publishing moves so slowly, when I read books, I want to make sure I'm doing something different than it's been done before, as opposed to doing what everyone else is doing. So when you set out to write any kind of novel, it's important to know what the universe of literature that exists in that world and try and do something different or better. Obviously, it's really hard because it feels like everything has been done. But I think writing to trend is a mistake. I think it also insinuates a certain amount of agency in what we do, and I don't feel like I have that much agency over what I choose to write. Ideas come to me, and those are the ideas that have to be written. I am not a good enough writer to sort of chase a trend. If paranormal is the next great thing, there would have to be an amazing paranormal idea that came to me. Someone can't just be like, Julie, write a paranormal book, and then I would. It doesn't work that way for me. And so, I try and write counter to trend if I can, only because it's boring to read the same books over and over and over again. But I don't always succeed at that.
So you make mention that you don't have a lot of agency over what you write because your writers and the ideas are there. Is there any amount of limitation that you feel coming from publishers or anything on that side, or do you feel a real freedom to write what is coming to you? What's sort of calling out?
Yeah, I mean, I have like the best publishing team in the world, I've decided. And I have no pushback on anything that I wanted to write. But that said, it is a business. So like you do have to make a proposal especially if you've been published already, you don't have to write an entire book to get the next book deal. You can just write a proposal for the next book and then you can get a book deal. If I said I wanted to write something insane, my editor will tell me no. Fortunately, she has not said no yet. But you do get branded, and I think that's probably one of the things that limits you. I don't think everyone gets this. Like Rainbow Rowell, for instance, gets to write young adult and adult books, which is awesome for her. But I do think that there's a risk of being like branded a certain kind of writer. And that's just a matter of finding a good team who will let you sort of spread your wings. Because then, you would get bored. Alyson was just saying that she'd written a lot of fantasy books and then you wanted to do something different. That's just because you want to keep yourself interested and also grow as a writer. You want to write something new just for yourself and flex those muscles. But yeah, I have a great team and I haven't had any say, no, you may not write that yet. But it could happen.
Yeah, I feel pretty lucky. I'm about to start. I have 22 books out and some in production, and I think I'm about to start number 25 right now. And in those books, one is an adult book. There will ultimately be 6 middle grade books, and then all the rest are YA. And some are contemporaries, some are standalones, some are series, some are paranormals. So I feel pretty lucky that I've been able to explore all those different genres and voices and age groups. I think just like if you have, most of those books were with the same publisher. I've branched out a little bit since, but it's really just about the idea. You come to them with your idea, and at this rate, we've we're published, we can put a proposal together. It doesn't always have to be in the form of a full book. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. And, as long as the idea seems like something viable and marketable, because it is a business, like she said, if it's crazy, they will say no. But as long as, you have a viable idea and you can pretty much have the freedom to sort of explore. And I mean, that's what you want to do as a creative person. There's a certain expectation, I have to say, when I finish the Immortals, a lot of the readers just wanted more and more and more Immortals. And on the one hand, that's super flattering. I love that they love the world that much. But as a writer, I felt like that story was done and it was time to end it. And could I have dragged it on? Sure. But I didn't want to, because I felt like I got these characters to the place where they were always meant to be, and it was time to say goodbye. Maybe someday in the future I would do a spin-off with alternate characters or something like that. I don't know. I don't like to rule anything out or box myself into a big no. But it was just time to write something different. It was time to explore new worlds. And as a creative person, I mean, that's what you want to do. You want to constantly be, exploring and growing and writing new things.
I can't think of an instance where I've had pushback or been limited to what I want to write. I have had instances where I put forth an idea and my editor, poked holes in it, and she was right, and so I did not write those books, and I'm glad she did. Only after I wrote this book, before I sold this book fully written, I had a conversation with my agent, and I had an idea for a book that was a memoir. It was sort of like one of those stunt journalism books, which would have been totally off-brand, and it was purely because I wanted to get into better shape. And so I came up with this whole idea to force myself professionally to do what I wanted to do personally. And my agent was like, "Are you sure you just don't want to go back to the gym? Just go to the gym. You don't have to write a book about it." And I was like, "Oh, you know what? You're right." So sometimes they tell you what you need to hear. I think if I did come up with something completely wackadoodle that is something so different or so impossible to pull off, that I might get some pushback. But generally, they've been incredibly supportive. And if they're not, there's a good reason why.
So in the spirit of talking about spreading your wings and growing professionally and in your writing life, tell us, what is coming next? What can we look forward to?
If you can. Right, so I can. The new book is announced. It's called The Sun is Also a Star, and it comes out November 1st of this year.
And the cover is amazing.
The cover is beautiful. It's out of control. And it's actually a handmade piece of art, which I'm going to get my hands on at some point. But yeah, it's about a very poetic boy who's trying to convince a very scientific, practical girl to fall in love with him over the course of 12 hours in New York City. And when I came up with that idea, I thought, 12 hours, New York's gonna be romantic. Do you know what a pain in the butt it is to write a book over 12 hours? Because you're like, that train takes 45 minutes to get from this point to this point, so they would only have this much time left. So yeah, that was sort of a practical nightmare, but the book's pretty good. And it comes out November 1st.
So in December, I have a middle grade novel coming out called 5 Days of Famous. I'm really excited about this one. I should have brought the ARC with me. It's got the cutest cover, and it's about a boy named Nick Dashaway who makes a Christmas wish that goes awry. And so that'll be out in December. And then book 2, and it's actually called, I've been calling it the Unrivaled series because book 1 is Unrivaled, but it's actually the Beautiful Idols series. So book 2 in the Beautiful Idols series will be out. I think they're going to move it up to April now. I heard a rumor. So maybe April of next year. I just finished writing it. It was super fun. It's really fast paced. It picks up right where this one leaves off because it's a trilogy. And I might have left this on a cliffhanger. I might have. I'm not sure because I wrote it a while ago, but it picks up right where this left off, and these 3 teens are in way over their head, and I can't even say anything about it because anything I say is going to be a spoiler, but it is a action-packed ride.
My next book is called What to Say Next, and I believe it comes out February 14th of 2017, so next February. Yeah, Valentine's Day. It might be the week before. We're not sure if it's February 7th or February 14th. But it's my favorite thing I've ever written, which would mean you would make you think that I'd be really excited for it to come out. But I feel exactly the opposite. I'm sort of like holding it close and don't want it to go out into the big bad world. Because it's sort of this special, little flower that, like, once I expose it to the elements, it's going to wilt. So I'm even scared to tell you what it's about. There's a description up on Amazon, which is actually an awful description. We have to change it, I think. But in the most vague terms, it's about two very different people who help each other through a very difficult time and unexpectedly connect during difficult times in each of their lives in high school. So it comes out next February. That's really all I can. I could say so much more about it, but I'm scared. I really am just too scared.
What's the book title?
What to Say Next.
So we've got about 15 minutes left, and I know some of you probably have questions for our panel. So I'm going to open it up to you all to hear what you want to know from these smart women about their books and publishing and writing for YA in romance. Yeah. What was the favorite thing to write when you were writing your books?
Oh, that's a good question. For everything, there are illustrations inside, and my husband did the illustrations, and we had a lot of fun doing those. The first one that I thought of was there's a fish in there. It's called the humu humu nuku nuku apua'a, which is the Hawaiian state fish. My 4-year-old can say that. I made her learn how to say that. But I had this idea that Maddie, who's the main character, she's obsessed with Hawaii, and I had this idea that her way of exploring the world would be to draw it because she's not allowed to be in it. So then I was like, I'll draw this fish, and I am terrible. I'm the worst artist on earth. So I drew this for a fish. But my husband is a terrific artist, and it was 4 a.m. when I was writing, because that's when I write. And I woke him up, and I said, honey, will you please draw me the Hawaiian state fish? And he got out of bed, and he made coffee, and he gave me a kiss, and he did not complain at all, and he just drew this beautiful fish. And it's the first one it's what started all the illustrations in the book. And we just had such a good time, doing it. There's a picture of an astronaut, Maddie as an astronaut, and I drew a stick figure and a circle for Earth. And because he loves me, he knew what I meant, and he made this beautiful picture, and we really had a good time. And because of that, now we're writing a book together because we had such a good time just collaborating. And I met him in grad school for writing too, so we always said we're going to do something together. And that started, with this book, and now we're writing something with each other. So that was my favorite part.
My favorite parts for Unrivaled, I have a few. So every chapter is a song title, and that was super fun because I love music, and the song titles span many decades and many music types, and trying to find the right song title for each chapter was challenging and fun. I didn't want it to be super on the nose. Sometimes it could be, though, if it was on the nose in a funny way. Sometimes it was to evoke a mood. Sometimes it just made me laugh, so I kept it. So that was really fun. Also writing Layla's her blog entries, because like I was saying, I got to make up Hollywood gossip, which was just super fun to do. And in her kind of snarky tone, which I used to be a pretty snarky, cynical, jaded person, and I'm not anymore. I had a huge transformation. But writing Layla, I got to go back to that old hidden part of me, and so that kind of got to come out a little bit again, and that was pretty fun, I have to say. And then always, always, always writing the villains, writing the evil, mean people. Those are my favorite characters to write. They're my favorite characters to read about, too. Because in their heads, their actions are justified. They don't necessarily see themselves as evil people. They have reasons for what they're doing, and they feel very justified in the things that they're doing. And they tend to kind of get the best lines, and they're larger than life, and so they're always really fun to write.
I always look really weird when I write because I laugh at my own jokes, and then I cry at the sad parts. And and I make faces, and I get really into it when I'm writing. So I guess the most fun parts to write are the happy parts, because I feel happy when I'm writing the happy bits. Again, heart-shaped waffles on the cover, we know that there's going to be sort of a happy ending. And so there is this sort of swoon-worthy last chapter that I really, really enjoyed writing. It was one of the most fun scenes I've ever written.
I have heart-shaped food, too. I wonder if, is this a cover trend? Heart-shaped food? Right?
But I think yours might end on a cliffhanger.
It does. Yeah, like, so don't be fooled.
Yeah.
What book influenced you the most when you were writing or before you started writing?
So the question is, what book influenced you the most before you started writing?
Well, I mean, I have a bunch of favorite books. The Little Prince is one of my favorite books. My main character reads it all the time, and I read it all the time, and the meaning does change for me every time I read it. I mean, I don't read it like every day, but 5 years will pass, and I'll read it and find something new in it. I think Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison was a big influence on me. 9 Stories by J.D. Salinger. The Great Gatsby for Language Alone. Oh my God, the language in that book. There's so many. I can't. It's like choosing among children. I'm going to stick with that. Okay.
So Charlotte's Web was the first book that made me cry. And that was a big moment because I was like, words on a page made me cry. So that I was always a really big reader, but it showed me how reading could be this really immersive emotional experience. In 6th grade, passing around a copy secretly. I don't know why secretly, because my mom did not monitor my reading and would not have mind, but it was just more fun to read in secret. Judy Blume's Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret. Life changer. I mean, this is the dark days before there was a big YA section at the bookstore. And so there were a few YA books to choose. And Judy Blume was one of the first that was writing in a really authentic way. And she was really chronicling the adolescent journey and what that felt like and what it looked like. And I felt like she was speaking directly to me and my friends and all the things we were going through. That and the fact that I got caught when I was done passing it on, when I was done reading it, I was passing it on in class, in math class, and my teacher caught me, and she confiscated the book. 6th grade, Mrs. Ballou, such a mean math teacher, confiscated the book, put it in her drawer. That was it. And I was like, oh my God, we're in really big trouble. The next day, she stood up before us and she said, imagine this is Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret. And she said, I just want you to know that I read this book during my lunch break and it's trash. And you should not be reading it and I will not return it. And that's the end of that. And it went back in her drawer. But at that moment, I realized, wow, okay, so this book had the power to make a group of 12-year-old 6th grade girls forfeit watching Welcome Back, Kotter and Happy Days in order to read this book. We forfeited, that was like, watching Vampire Diaries back in the day, okay? We forfeited our favorite shows so we could read this book, and it enraged a math teacher. So to me, there was magic in that book. Like, this is very, very powerful stuff, and I want a piece of that. And that is when I made the decision at 12, Mrs. Blue's enraged face, I was going to be a writer too someday. And then J.D. Salinger, Catcher in the Rye. I was an alienated, unhappy high school student, and I met another one in Holden Caulfield, and I felt a little less alone in the world.
So I have a new life goal now. I want, the Mrs. Ballous of the world to confiscate my book and put it in a drawer. I always find this question so tricky because I feel like books change for you as you get older, and a book that spoke to you at 16 might not speak to you at 23 and will speak to you again at 30. And as time goes on, I have a different relationship with books that I used to love. I read them again, I'm like, or I'll read something and I just won't touch me, and then I'll pick it up again 5 years later and it just speaks to my soul. So I don't know. So I think every book I read, and I read really critically now, and I make sure I read as a writer as opposed to a reader. So every single book I read inspires me, and anything that I read and wish I had written, I spend a little extra time on trying to figure out how they did the magic and the alchemy behind it to make me a better writer. So I find that all inspiring. As for particular books, my favorite book of all time is The Secret Garden. And it's a wonderful book, but it's more because for personal reasons. I have very few memories of childhood, and one of them is sitting on my mom's lap and her reading The Secret Garden to me. And I found it when I was leaving for college and reread it. And I didn't realize at the time it's about a girl who loses her parents. And it's a book about healing and blooming in the face of loss, which spoke to me personally. And so I reread it probably every year. I had passages read from it at my wedding. It's just a huge part of my life. I recently read it to my daughter for the first time, which was really a wonderful experience, though I saw it now through very politically correct eyes and was a little disturbed. And so sort of had to edit as I read, which was, she's 6, and so I had to make sure I wasn't sending the wrong message. Again, though, books change for you as you get older, so it's interesting how that happens.
Did everybody hear the question? The question's about the hero's journey, and do you know at the beginning how your characters are going to change by the end?
Yeah, so for me, every book is different. With everything, I knew exactly where Maddie needed to end up, and Ollie and her mom, and but for my second book, I did not know what was going on with them, how they were going to interact and change each other's lives. And your characters do start to talk to you, and they do, people always ask about writer's block, and I find for me, when I get writer's block, it's because the character has done something that they wouldn't do, right? And they're telling me, so I can't move on because they're like, no, I would never do that, I would never say that. And the only way for me to get through that is basically to hit the delete button and go back and go and figure out where I went wrong. So the characters do start to talk to you and make their own way and have an end that you maybe didn't expect. That's how it works for me. I think I wrote 3 different endings for the new book, and it took forever, but then the ending where it is now is the perfect ending, but it took a while because I wasn't necessarily listening to what they were telling me along the way. So yeah, I think my third book, I pretty much know what's going to happen. So it's different for every book.
I'm a plotter, so I generally know. I do the Blake Snyder Save the Cat beat sheet, and I also use a lot of Robert McKee to plot my books. That said, it's not a super detailed 100-page outline. It's literally just the major story beats along the way. It helps me from getting lost in the dreaded saggy middle where, it's like this forest of words. It always happens. Forest of words, halfway through, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing here. I don't know who these people are. This is a disaster. They're going to find out I don't know what I'm doing. I'm going to be fired from the world. That whole thing sets in. And my husband reminds me, we've been here 23 times before. And I'm like, this time is different. You so don't get it, So that is inevitable. And, and then if I can remember, oh yeah, I did that beat sheet, that might be helpful. And it always is. So I always know where I'm going to start, where I'm going to end. I know the beats along the way, but it's like she said, your characters, you start to get to know them better as they grow on page and as they grow in your head. And so I allow room to maybe, take some detours along the way. Maybe the exact thing doesn't happen in that way because the character who I thought they were at the beginning of the book isn't really who they are. And maybe they would react a little bit differently. That said, I always end up back, with the ending that I started with. So for me, I'm not really usually surprised by my endings. That said, with Unrivaled, when I started this, I had a really firm idea of who is behind all the mayhem in the book, and I changed my mind about halfway through, and it is somebody entirely different now. But hopefully, because it's really pretty much a mystery suspense thriller, hopefully that'll help mask who did it, because I actually didn't know who did it.
From a plot perspective, I don't write it all out. I don't have outlines. With this book, for example, I needed to know who SN was from the second I sat down to write the book, and I did. SN's the anonymous emailer. SN is short for somebody, nobody. And so I needed to know who that person was to have consistency of voice and for the story to come together and to make sense. But I think you're asking in terms of character growth. And no, I don't know. The character surprises me. I think it'd be too simple to have the character have a certain characteristic. Like I say, a character's too selfish, and at the end learns to be not selfish, and to set out to do that. It would be boring and too straightforward. And as you write a character, they get fuller and fuller and fuller and become more real and become real people with flaws. And you don't actually want to fix all of their flaws. My books end with my characters almost as flawed at the end as at the beginning. They just tend to learn things along the way and have personal growth, which I think is different than sort of solving your flaws. And so, yeah, I have no idea where that personal growth is going to come from. And hopefully it just sort of gets baked in somehow subconsciously. And then I look back and then I start sort of weaving in some of the things that I've noticed that happen throughout. And that sometimes happens in the editing process. It's sort of there glaring at me and just sort of needs to be expounded upon in a further draft.
Thank you all for being here. We're at time. I know we could probably do this all evening long. But I want to thank the panelists again for sharing their wisdom and sharing their knowledge. And I want to remind you that all three of them will be signing as we go outside. And you're going to hit the street and turn right. And there will be, Katina will be sort of leading folks on to where they need to be. So thank you so much.